I was driving late at night on the secluded highway, just trying to make it to my destination. It was dark, and the road seemed never-ending. That's when I encountered it, a bizarre road blockade out of nowhere. There were these barriers set up, blocking the entire road. It was odd, unexpected. I couldn't see any construction signs or warning lights, just this eerie blockade in the middle of nowhere. I got out of my car to inspect, thinking maybe there was an accident or roadwork ahead. But as I approached, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. There were these figures, shadowy silhouettes in the darkness, standing behind the blockade. I couldn't make out their faces, just their forms outlined by the faint moonlight. I asked what was going on, why the road was blocked. They didn't respond, just stood there, this unsettling silence hanging heavy in the air. I felt this chill, this sense of danger. I wanted to turn around and leave, but they didn't move, blocking my way back to my car. I tried to reason, to ask them to let me through, but they just stared at me, this unsettling gaze that sent shivers down my spine. I sensed something was wrong, that I needed to get away. I turned to head back to my car, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, this fear gripping me as I turned around. They were coming closer, these figures emerging from the darkness, surrounding me. I couldn't see their faces, just their dark figures looming over me. It was like a nightmare come to life, this feeling of being trapped, this sense of impending danger. I tried to step back, to find a way out, but they kept closing in. I felt this panic rising inside me, this desperate need to escape. I managed to dart past them, running towards my car. I fumbled with the keys, trying to unlock the door, feeling this urgency to get away from those people. As I started the engine, I saw them in my rearview mirror, just standing there, watching. It was terrifying, this encounter with these unknown individuals in the dead of night. I drove off, feeling this relief of leaving that eerie blockade behind. But the fear lingered, the memory of those shadowy figures, their silence haunting me. I reported it to the authorities, but without much to go on, they said there wasn't anything they could do. It left me feeling vulnerable, this encounter that made no sense, that left me with this lingering fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, or rather the lack of faces, just these dark, shadowy figures that sent shivers down my spine. It was like a nightmare I couldn't escape, this roadblock on that secluded highway that led to an unnerving confrontation with those unsettling individuals. I was driving on this stretch of road, nothing unusual, just minding my own business. That's when it happened. This car came out of nowhere, tailgating me aggressively. I tried to change lanes, thinking maybe they were in a rush, but they kept on my tail, honking, flashing their lights. It was unnerving, this sudden aggression from a stranger on the road. I sped up, trying to create some distance, but they stayed right behind me, driving recklessly, swerving side to side as if they were trying to intimidate me. I tried to ignore them, hoping they'd back off, but they just wouldn't let up. They kept getting closer, this relentless pursuit that made my heart race. I wanted to call for help, but I couldn't risk taking my eyes off the road. I didn't know what they were capable of, this stranger consumed by road rage. I tried taking different turns, hoping to lose them, but they were right there, always following, always aggressive. It felt like this never-ending nightmare, this pursuit that wouldn't stop. I was scared, not knowing what they wanted or why they were after me. It was like they were targeting me specifically, this terrifying feeling of being hunted. I tried to keep calm, to focus on driving, but the fear kept growing. It was like they were trying to force me off the road, this aggressive behavior that left me feeling vulnerable. I saw an opportunity and managed to take a different route, hoping to finally escape. But they were right behind me, this relentless chase that felt like it would never end. I tried calling the authorities, explaining what was happening, but they were still pursuing me, getting more aggressive with every passing moment. I didn't know what to do, where to go. It was late, and the roads were deserted, leaving me feeling isolated and terrified. I drove faster, hoping to lose them in the darkness, but they were right there, this looming presence that wouldn't go away. I finally reached a more populated area, hoping for help, but they stayed behind, this aggressive pursuit that left me feeling defenseless. I pulled over at a gas station, hoping someone would intervene, but they just circled around, this relentless aggression that made my blood run cold. I managed to find a moment and ran into the store, hoping to seek refuge, but they followed, banging on the glass, shouting threats that made my heart sink. I locked myself in a bathroom stall, shaking, feeling this overwhelming fear. I didn't know what they wanted, why they were after me. I called the police again, telling them my location, but the fear of what might happen before help arrived left me paralyzed. It felt like an eternity before I heard the police sirens. They arrived, and the aggressor was finally taken into custody, but the terror of that night stayed with me. It was this relentless road rage that turned into a night of fear and pursuit, a nightmare I wished I could erase from my memory. We were driving along this long, empty highway, and it was getting late, so we decided to stop at this isolated diner for a quick bite. The place looked run down, with flickering neon lights and this eerie vibe. As we entered, there was this silence, this strange hush that fell over the diner. The occupants, just a few customers and the staff, all turned to look at us. Their stares felt off, unwelcoming. We tried to brush it off, thinking maybe they weren't used to visitors. We found a table and sat down, but the atmosphere was tense, this strange feeling hanging in the air. The waitress came over, but she didn't say a word, just stood there, staring. It was uncomfortable, this silence that felt suffocating. We ordered our food, trying to make small talk, but no one responded. It was like they were in their own world, this eerie detachment that made us uneasy. The food arrived, but there was something off about it, the smell, the taste, it felt strange. We didn't dare complain, afraid of stirring trouble in this eerie place. We noticed the other customers, they were just sitting there, not eating, not talking. It was like they were frozen in time, these blank expressions that gave us chills. I needed to use the restroom, so I excused myself and headed towards the back. But as I walked, I heard whispers, these faint murmurs that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it felt ominous, like they were talking about us. I hurried into the restroom, feeling this urge to leave, to get away from that eerie silence. I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to shake off this unease, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. As I stepped out, I saw the staff huddled together, whispering and glancing in our direction. It felt like they were plotting something, this sinister vibe that made me want to leave immediately. I rushed back to our table, telling my companions that we needed to go, that something wasn't right about this place. But as we got up, the silence grew more suffocating, the stares more intense. The waitress blocked our way, this stern look in her eyes. She said something, but her voice was cold, this warning that sent chills down my spine. I didn't wait for another word, just bolted towards the exit, my companions following. We heard footsteps behind us, this sense of urgency pushing us to run. As we reached our car, I glanced back at the diner. The occupants were standing outside, just watching us, this eerie silence surrounding them. We drove off, this sense of relief flooding over us, but the memory of that place, those strange and unwelcoming occupants, it haunted us. We didn't talk much about it, but the unease lingered, this feeling of being in the presence of something inexplicable, something sinister. It was like a nightmare we stumbled into, that isolated diner on the highway, its occupants strangely eerie and unwelcoming. my car suddenly sputtered and came to a halt. I tried everything, but it just wouldn't start. I was stranded, no signal, no help in sight. I decided to walk, hoping to find help or at least a place with a phone. It was eerily quiet, just the sound of my footsteps on the asphalt. The darkness felt suffocating, the only light coming from the distant stars. After a while, I saw headlights approaching in the distance, relief washing over me. But as the car got closer, I realized it wasn't slowing down, it was speeding towards me. I jumped out of the way just in time, heart racing, as the car zoomed past. It was terrifying, this reckless behavior on this empty road. I kept walking, feeling this sense of urgency to find help. Then, I saw a small building in the distance, a rundown gas station. I thought maybe they'd have a phone or could help with my car trouble. As I approached, the lights were flickering, giving this eerie feeling. There were a few people outside, smoking, just staring at me as I got closer. They looked rough, unwelcoming. I tried to smile and ask for help, explaining my situation, but they just stared, this unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. One of them finally spoke, gruffly saying they couldn't help and to leave. It felt wrong, this refusal to help someone in need, but their demeanor sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I decided to leave, feeling this growing fear. As I turned, I saw them whispering, casting glances in my direction. It was like they were planning something, this sinister vibe that made me shiver. I walked back towards my car, trying to remain calm, but the unease grew with every step. It felt like they were watching me, this sense of being hunted in the darkness. I reached my car and tried to fix it again, but it was no use. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, getting closer. I turned around, and it was them, the people from the gas station, approaching with this eerie silence. I felt this primal fear, this fight or flight response kicking in. I tried to reason with them, asking for help again, but they just stood there, this menacing silence surrounding them. I knew I had to get away, to escape this eerie situation. I sprinted into the darkness, hoping to find refuge, hoping to get away from those sinister individuals. But they were faster, this pursuit that made my heart race. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, their gruff voices shouting something unintelligible. I didn't stop running, didn't look back, just kept going, hoping to find safety. It felt like an eternity before I stumbled upon another car on the highway. I waved frantically, begging for help, and thankfully, they stopped. I jumped in, trying to explain what happened, this fear still gripping me. The driver took me to the nearest town, where I could get help. I reported the incident to the authorities, but without much to go on, there wasn't anything they could do. It was a nightmarish encounter, being stranded on that desolate stretch of highway, encountering those sinister individuals who seemed intent on causing harm. Me and a couple of friends were on this road trip, cruising through the country, when we decided to take a break at this remote rest stop. It seemed peaceful, nestled among the trees, but that tranquility didn't last long. There were a few other cars parked there, and some people hanging around. At first, it all seemed normal, just travelers taking a break like us. But as we got closer, something felt off. There was this group of individuals, a rough-looking bunch, giving off this unsettling vibe. They were staring at us, not saying a word, just watching as we parked. We tried to ignore it, thinking maybe they were just curious, but their stares made us uneasy. We walked towards the rest area, hoping to find some snacks or a restroom. As we got closer, we noticed more of them, just loitering around. They didn't seem like regular travelers, more like they were waiting for something or someone. We went inside, hoping to find refuge, but there were more of them in there. They didn't acknowledge us, just kept to themselves, but the air felt tense, this silent tension that made me anxious. We tried to play it cool, pretending everything was fine, but I could feel their eyes on us, this unsettling gaze that followed our every move. We grabbed some snacks and decided to head back to our car. But as we walked out, they started to gather around us, blocking our path. I could sense danger, this sudden shift in their demeanor. They weren't just curious anymore, they looked menacing, this sudden aggression that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to stay calm, to reason with them, but they just glared, this silence feeling more threatening than words. We tried to walk around them, but they wouldn't let us leave. It was like they were trapping us, this feeling of being surrounded by an unknown threat. One of them stepped forward, this sinister smile on his face. He said something, but it wasn't friendly. It was a warning, a threat that made my heart race. I could see my friends getting nervous, feeling this growing fear. We didn't know what to do, where to go. It was a remote rest stop, and there was no one else around. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. Panic started to set in as I realized how isolated we were, how vulnerable. We made a dash for it, trying to push past them, but they were stronger, this force blocking our escape. It was like they were toying with us, this menacing game of cat and mouse. We ran back inside, hoping to find safety, but they followed, this relentless pursuit that felt suffocating. We found a room and barricaded ourselves inside, hoping they wouldn't break in. We could hear them outside, shouting threats, banging on the door. I called the authorities, explaining our situation, but it felt like forever before help arrived. We were trapped, this feeling of being at the mercy of these unsettling individuals. The police finally arrived, and the aggressors fled. We were safe, but the memory of that encounter, those unsettling individuals at the remote rest stop, haunted us. I was walking down this desolate highway, hoping to catch a ride. It was getting late, and the darkness was closing in, so when a car slowed down, I felt relieved. The driver seemed friendly, offering a ride without hesitation. I hopped in, grateful for the lift. We started chatting, and everything seemed normal at first. The driver was amiable, asking about my journey and sharing stories. But as we continued, things took a turn. The driver started asking strange questions, prying into personal matters, making me uncomfortable. I tried to divert the conversation, but the driver persisted, this relentless questioning that made my skin crawl. Then, the driver took a wrong turn. It felt deliberate, this deviation from the main road, and I felt this growing sense of unease. I asked about the route change, but the driver brushed it off, saying it was a shortcut. But it didn't seem like one, it felt like we were heading deeper into the unknown. As we drove further, I noticed a shift in the driver's behavior. They became increasingly erratic, this nervous energy emanating from them. I felt this rising panic, this feeling of being trapped in a car with a stranger who was acting bizarrely. Then, I saw a glint of something metallic in the driver's pocket. It was a knife, and that sight sent a chill down my spine. I tried to remain calm, not wanting to escalate the situation. But the driver's demeanor was unsettling, this sense of danger looming over me. I asked to be let out, pretending it was near my destination, but the driver refused. Their smile turned menacing, this sinister grin that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I realized I was in trouble, this sinking feeling of being at the mercy of someone with malicious intent. I tried to grab my phone to call for help, but it was out of battery. Panic started to set in. I was completely vulnerable. The driver's behavior became more erratic, swerving on the road, speeding up and slowing down unpredictably. It was like they were playing with me, this terrifying game of control. I searched for a chance to escape, but the car was moving too fast, and there was nowhere to run. Then, I saw a patrol car in the distance. I mustered all my courage and screamed for help, hoping they'd see us and intervene. The driver seemed agitated, but they slowed down as the patrol car approached. I saw the flashing lights, this glimmer of hope that I'd be rescued. The patrol car signaled us to stop, and the driver complied. I was trembling, this sense of relief washing over me as the officers approached. I explained the situation, the fear I felt, and the erratic behavior of the driver. The officers took control, escorting me to safety and dealing with the driver. I was safe, but the memory of that chilling encounter with a seemingly friendly driver who turned out to be something else haunted me. It was a nightmarish ride, a terrifying series of events that left me shaken and wary of hitchhiking ever again. I was driving alone on this remote highway, heading back home after a long day. It was late, and I needed a break, so I pulled into this deserted rest area. The place was empty, silent except for the hum of my engine. I stepped out, stretching my legs, when I noticed a group of people at the far end of the rest area. They were just standing there, this unsettling sight in the darkness. I couldn't make out their faces, but something felt off about them. I tried to ignore it, dismissing it as my imagination, and headed towards the restroom. But as I walked past them, they started whispering, this low murmur that made my hair stand on end. I quickened my pace, this growing unease settling in. I heard footsteps behind me, and when I glanced back, I saw them following, this silent pursuit that sent shivers down my spine. I hurried into the restroom, trying to shake off this inexplicable fear. I stayed in there longer than necessary, trying to gather the courage to walk back. When I finally stepped out, they were gone, or so I thought. I got back to my car, hoping to leave, but as I started the engine, I saw them emerging from the shadows, this menacing group heading my way. I felt this panic rising inside me, this sense of being trapped. I locked my doors, but they surrounded the car, this threatening presence that made me feel vulnerable and alone. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I felt this overwhelming fear, this realization that I was at their mercy. They started banging on my car windows, shouting threats, demanding I open the door. I felt this suffocating terror, this instinct to escape, but there was nowhere to go. I could see their faces now, this malicious intent in their eyes. They were armed, this sight sending waves of fear through me. I honked the horn, hoping to attract attention, but the rest area was deserted, this feeling of isolation making my heart race. I pleaded with them, trying to reason, but they just kept shouting, this growing aggression that was paralyzing. I remembered a small tool in my car, something to defend myself. I grabbed it, this trembling hand trying to protect myself. They continued their assault, this relentless banging, this menacing chorus of threats. I felt this overwhelming sense of terror, this feeling of being completely vulnerable. I managed to drive off, this adrenaline-fueled escape that felt like a miracle. They chased for a bit, but I outpaced them, this sense of relief flooding me. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station, this urgent need to find help. I explained what happened, but they couldn't find any trace of those people. I called the authorities, shaking as I recounted the night's events. They arrived, but there was no sign of that threatening group. I was safe, but the memory of that night haunted me. It was like a nightmare come true, this encounter with a group that turned a pit stop into a night of terror. I was driving on this lonely stretch of highway, the road stretched ahead of me, empty and silent. It was late, and I was the only one on the road, or so I thought. I noticed a car in my rearview mirror, a few cars back. At first, I didn't think much of it, but it stayed there, not overtaking or falling behind, just following at a distance. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road, but this feeling crept in, this sense that something wasn't right. The car didn't seem to have any reason to follow me, no other cars around, no exits or turns for miles. I changed lanes a few times, but that car kept following, this persistent presence that sent chills down my spine. I began to feel uneasy, this growing apprehension that I was being watched, followed by someone with malicious intent. I tried to speed up, hoping to leave the car behind, but it matched my pace, this relentless pursuit that made my heart race. I saw the driver's silhouette, this figure obscured by the darkness. They didn't seem to have any intention of passing me or leaving. I felt this growing panic, this instinct to escape, but I was on this deserted highway with nowhere to go. I tried calling for help, but my phone had no signal. I felt this overwhelming sense of isolation, this terror at being pursued with no way to reach out. I contemplated pulling over, confronting the driver, but the thought of stopping on this deserted road with a menacing car behind me filled me with dread. I tried to rationalize, maybe it was just a coincidence, but the way that car stuck to me, this persistence, felt menacing. I decided to take the next exit, hoping to lose the car. But when I did, that car followed, this escalating fear as it stuck to me like glue. I drove through the small town, hoping for some semblance of safety or help, but it was empty, this eerie silence enveloping me. I started to panic, this feeling of being trapped. I didn't know what this person wanted or why they were following me, but the fear was consuming me. I tried to shake them off, taking random turns, but that car was relentless, this sense of being pursued by someone with sinister intentions. I saw a gas station ahead, this glimmer of hope, and pulled in. I rushed out of my car, hoping to find someone, anyone, for help. But the gas station was deserted, this eerie feeling sinking in as I looked around, this realization that I was alone, with that car parked outside. I felt this overwhelming dread, this escalating terror that I was at the mercy of someone dangerous. I stayed in the gas station, hiding, hoping they would leave, but that car stayed there, this unyielding presence that left me trembling. I called the authorities, trying to explain, but I struggled to articulate the situation, this fear consuming my thoughts. They arrived after what felt like an eternity, but that car was gone. There was no trace of the person who had been following me. I was safe, but the memory of that night haunted me, this relentless pursuit on that deserted highway that left me feeling vulnerable and terrified. I was driving along this isolated highway, nothing but the sound of my engine and the fastness of the road ahead. As I continued, I noticed these abandoned vehicles parked on the side, almost hidden among the trees. I didn't think much of it at first, just old cars left behind. But as I passed, I saw people lingering around them, this group of individuals that seemed out of place. I slowed down, curious but also wary. They looked like squatters, living in these abandoned vehicles, but something about them felt off. I noticed they were watching me, this intense scrutiny that made me uncomfortable. I kept driving, hoping to leave them behind. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw them getting into their cars, following me. It was unsettling, this sudden pursuit by a group of strangers. I felt this growing unease, this sense of being followed by someone with unknown intentions. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. I took a turn, hoping to lose them, but they kept following, this relentless pursuit that sent shivers down my spine. I saw a gas station ahead, this hope for safety, and pulled in. But as I got out, I saw them parking nearby, this menacing presence that made my heart race. I tried to act normal, going into the gas station, hoping to find someone. But it was empty, this eerie silence adding to my fear. I heard footsteps outside, this realization that they were getting closer. I panicked, not knowing what to do. I stayed inside, trying to hide, but they knew I was there. They started banging on the windows, shouting threats, demanding I come out. I felt this overwhelming sense of vulnerability, this fear of being surrounded by strangers with unknown intentions. I called for help, but there was no signal. I was alone, with these menacing figures outside. I contemplated making a run for it, but the fear held me back. I was trapped, this feeling of helplessness overwhelming me. I heard them trying to break in, this escalating danger that left me trembling. I searched desperately for something to defend myself. I managed to find a tool, this trembling hand trying to prepare for whatever might happen next. But then, they stopped. The banging ceased, the voices faded away. I cautiously peeked outside, but they were gone. I waited, trying to gather the courage to leave, and when I finally did, I drove as fast as I could, not looking back. I reached the nearest town, this sense of relief flooding over me. I reported what happened, but the authorities found no trace of those squatters. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with barely any other cars on the road. As I continued, I noticed this peculiar barrier ahead, wooden planks and debris blocking the entire road. I slowed down, trying to make sense of it. It seemed inexplicable, this barrier in the middle of nowhere. I thought it might be some roadwork or an accident, but it looked deliberate, almost foreboding. I rolled down my window, trying to listen for any sounds, but there was nothing, just an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. I contemplated turning around, finding another route, but something held me back, this curiosity mixed with a sense of foreboding. I got out of my car, approaching cautiously. As I neared the barrier, I noticed symbols and markings on the wood, strange and cryptic. They sent shivers down my spine, this feeling of entering into something ominous. I tried to move some of the debris, but it was as if the barrier was designed to withstand any attempt to dismantle it. Then, I heard a sound, this rustling from the woods nearby. I froze, this inexplicable fear taking over, but when I looked, there was nothing. I felt this growing unease, this feeling of being watched. I hurried back to my car, this instinct to leave kicking in. But when I turned around, I saw figures emerging from the trees, silhouettes in the darkness. They were dressed in odd attire, moving toward me with purposeful strides. I panicked, this primal fear taking over. I got into my car, trying to start the engine, but it wouldn't start, this sense of dread enveloping me. The figures were getting closer, this menacing presence that made my heart race. I tried again and again to start the car, but it was as if it had given up on me. I looked around desperately, trying to find a way out, but the figures surrounded me, this overwhelming feeling of being trapped. I locked the doors, this desperate attempt to protect myself. They were at my windows, tapping, whispering words I couldn't understand. I felt this rising panic, this terror that gripped me. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal, this isolation adding to my fear. I saw one of them approaching, this leader-like figure, with symbols etched on their clothes. They spoke in a language I didn't recognize, this gut-wrenching feeling of being in the midst of something inexplicable. I pleaded, begged for them to let me go, but they seemed intent on something, this air of ominous purpose around them. I saw lights in the distance, this glimmer of hope, and shouted for help, hoping someone would hear me. The figures seemed to retreat, disappearing into the woods as the lights approached. It was the authorities, this overwhelming relief flooding over me. They questioned me, but when we went back to the barrier, there was nothing. No debris, no symbols, just an empty highway. The road practically empty except for a few other cars here and there. It was late, and the night was pitch black, not a single light except for the ones from my headlights. Then, something caught my eye, a caravan of vehicles ahead. It wasn't just one or two, it was this strange procession of old, rusted cars and vans, all driving one after another in perfect formation. It was bizarre, to say the least. I've seen weird things on the road before, but this was different. It wasn't just peculiar, it was almost ominous. I tried to pass them, but they were moving slow, this deliberate pace that made it impossible to overtake them. I felt this sense of unease, this inexplicable fear settling in as I stayed behind them. The caravan seemed to stretch on forever, these vehicles all linked together as if they were part of some ritualistic parade. I couldn't see who was driving them, they were all obscured by the darkness and the dust kicked up by their own wheels. I contemplated turning off the highway, finding another route, but I was curious, almost intrigued by this strange spectacle. Then, things got weirder. I noticed they were signaling to each other, this cryptic communication that sent chills down my spine. It was as if they were coordinating, working together in a way that made no sense. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but the caravan slowed down, this sudden halt that caught me off guard. They came to a complete stop, blocking the entire road. I braked, this panic rising inside me. I couldn't go forward, and they wouldn't let me pass. I honked my horn, trying to get their attention, but they remained still, this eerie silence surrounding us. Then, one of the vehicles at the front opened its doors, and people started stepping out. They wore these strange clothes, almost ceremonial, and they began to form this line across the road, facing me. I felt this overwhelming sense of fear, this feeling of being trapped. I tried to reverse, but there were other cars behind me now, this feeling of being encircled. I was about to get out and confront them when I noticed something else. Some of the people in the line were carrying objects, long sticks or poles, almost resembling weapons. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to get out of there. I managed to turn my car around, finding a small gap between the vehicles and maneuvering through. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, seeing them get back into their cars, this eerie feeling that they were following me. I tried to lose them, taking turns, speeding up, but they stayed behind, this relentless pursuit that left me terrified. I could see their headlights in my mirrors, this menacing presence that made my heart race. I didn't know what they wanted or why they were after me, but the fear consumed me. I reached a gas station, hoping for safety, but when I got out, I saw them pulling in, this sense of being hunted that filled me with dread. I locked myself in the gas station, calling for help, but there was no one around. It was just me, alone, with those strange people outside. They didn't try to get in, they just stayed there, this ominous silence hanging in the air. Eventually, they left, disappearing into the night, but the fear stayed with me. It was this encounter with a bizarre caravan on the highway that turned into a night of pursuit and terror, leaving me shaken and haunted by what I couldn't understand. I was cruising down this long, empty highway, the night sky overhead, and the road stretching out before me. The only company I had was the hum of my car's engine. Then, in the distance, I saw this figure walking on the side of the road. It was odd, being out here in the dead of night, but I couldn't just drive past someone potentially in need. I slowed down and pulled over. As the figure approached, I could see it was a person, wrapped in layers of clothing, the face obscured by shadows. They looked exhausted, maybe stranded. I rolled down my window and asked if they needed any help. The figure hesitated for a moment before nodding silently. I offered a ride, and without a word, they got in. As they settled in the passenger seat, this eerie feeling washed over me. There was something off about this traveler, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried making conversation, asking where they were headed, but they remained silent. Their presence felt heavy, this inexplicable tension building in the car. I focused on the road, trying to ignore the unsettling silence between us. But then, I noticed something strange. They had no luggage, no bags or belongings. It was odd, just someone wandering alone at night with nothing. I tried to shake off this growing unease, chalking it up to fatigue and paranoia. But the longer they sat there, the more uneasy I became. I saw an exit approaching and decided to stop for a break. As I pulled into the gas station, I realized the traveler hadn't said a word, hadn't moved or even looked around. They just sat there, this stillness that was unnerving. I got out to stretch my legs, hoping to ease this growing tension. But when I turned back to the car, they were gone. Vanished, without a trace. I felt this jolt of panic, this sudden fear that crawled up my spine. I looked around, but there was no sign of them anywhere. It was as if they vanished into thin air. I decided to leave, this feeling of dread growing with every passing moment. As I merged back onto the highway, I saw them again, this figure walking ahead on the road, disappearing into the darkness. I was shaken, this sense of something being deeply wrong with that encounter. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't forget the eerie silence and their sudden disappearance. I continued driving, this inexplicable feeling of being followed, this sensation of their presence lingering in my mind. I reached a motel, hoping to find some respite, but the unease stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I settled into bed, I heard this tapping on the window. I froze, this fear gripping me. I approached cautiously, but when I looked outside, there was no one there. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing noises outside, this constant tapping and rustling. I felt this growing terror, this sense of being watched. I decided to leave, this instinct to get away overpowering me. But as I got in the car, I saw them again, standing in the distance, watching. I drove, this fear consuming me, this feeling of being chased by someone enigmatic and unsettling. It was this encounter with that traveler that turned into a night of suspense and dread, leaving me haunted by their inexplicable presence. Up ahead, I saw someone, a hitchhiker, standing by the side of the road. It felt strange seeing someone out here, but I felt this instinct to help, this sense of obligation to offer a ride. I pulled over, and the hitchhiker approached the car. They looked ordinary enough, just someone in need of a lift. They got in, and I greeted them, but there was something about their demeanor that felt off. They were polite enough, but there was this underlying tension, this sense of unease that settled between us. I tried to make conversation, asking where they were headed, but they were vague, giving short, almost evasive answers. They seemed jittery, fidgeting in their seat, and I couldn't shake this growing discomfort. As we drove, I noticed they kept glancing at me, this intense gaze that made me feel uncomfortable. It was as if they were studying me, sizing me up, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I contemplated dropping them off at the next stop, but I felt this obligation, this need to see this through. Maybe it was just my imagination, I thought, trying to dismiss this growing feeling of unease. Then, they asked if I could take a detour, claiming they needed to get something from a place not too far off the highway. I hesitated, but I agreed, this sense of obligation still lingering. As we turned onto this desolate road, it felt wrong. There were no signs of life, no houses or buildings, just darkness surrounding us. I felt this fear creeping in, this realization that I'd made a mistake. They suddenly asked me to stop, claiming they had to use the bathroom. They got out, disappearing into the darkness. I waited, but minutes turned into an eternity, and they didn't return. I felt this inexplicable panic rising in my chest. I got out of the car, calling out for them, but there was no response, just this eerie silence that hung in the air. Then, I heard this faint noise, this rustling from the woods nearby. I called out again, but there was no answer. I felt this primal fear taking over, this urge to get back in my car and drive. As I turned to leave, I saw them emerge from the shadows, holding something in their hand, a knife. My heart stopped, this overwhelming terror consuming me. I sprinted back to my car, this sheer instinct to escape kicking in. I fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, but my hands were shaking so violently that I couldn't get the key in the ignition. I heard their footsteps behind me, this malevolent presence that made my blood run cold. I finally managed to start the car, and I peeled out of there, this fear driving me faster than I'd ever driven before. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing them standing there in the darkness, watching me drive away. It was this chilling encounter with that hitchhiker, this sense of malevolence and danger, that left me shaken to my core, haunted by the terror of what could have happened. I was driving down this familiar highway, the road I'd taken numerous times before. But today, things were different. There were detour signs, flashing red lights, and this overwhelming sense of confusion as I followed the redirected path. The detour led me onto this narrow, deserted road, surrounded by dense woods. It was eerie, this feeling of isolation that settled in as I drove deeper into the unfamiliar territory. There were no other cars around, just me navigating through this desolate route. The air felt thick with tension, this inexplicable unease settling in as I kept driving. Then, I noticed something high up ahead, a figure standing by the side of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a person, just standing there, staring at passing cars. It was unsettling, this solitary figure in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down, contemplating offering help or asking if they needed anything, but this sense of caution held me back. They didn't acknowledge me, just continued staring ahead as I drove past. I tried to shake off this uneasy feeling, chalking it up to the strange circumstances of the detour. But then, I saw more figures, more people standing along the road, all of them just watching, not moving or saying a word. It was this surreal sight, this feeling of being watched, that sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't understand why they were there, just standing silently in the middle of nowhere. As I continued along the detour, things got weirder. I saw abandoned vehicles on the side of the road, some of them with their doors open, almost as if the drivers had left in a hurry. I felt this growing sense of dread, this fear building inside me. I wanted to turn back, find another route, but I was too deep into the detour to go back. Then, I reached a point where the road was blocked by fallen trees, this barrier that stopped me in my tracks. I couldn't go forward, and I didn't want to turn back, trapped between this unsettling roadblock and the figures I'd passed earlier. I contemplated getting out to clear the path when I heard something, a rustling from the woods nearby. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, this ominous sound that filled the air. I felt this overwhelming panic, this urge to get out of there as fast as I could. I tried to reverse, but I saw figures emerging from the woods, these silent observers closing in around me. I was trapped, this feeling of being surrounded by these unsettling strangers, this realization that I was in a dangerous situation. I didn't know what they wanted or why they were there, but I knew I had to get out. I maneuvered my car through a small gap between the fallen trees, this sheer desperation to escape guiding my every move. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, seeing them standing there, watching me leave. It was this encounter with the unsettling figures on the detour, this sense of being directed into a nightmare, that left me shaken and haunted by what I couldn't comprehend. I was driving late at night, just cruising down this deserted highway. It was peaceful, the hum of the engine and the sound of tires on the asphalt, until I spotted these construction signs ahead. It was strange seeing a construction crew working at this hour. As I got closer, the area was eerily silent. No machinery, no workers, just these signs and barriers. I slowed down, trying to see what was going on, but it felt off. The signs indicated a construction zone, but there was no actual construction happening, just this deserted stretch of road. I saw a few other cars ahead, stopped at the same spot. We all seemed puzzled, trying to make sense of this odd scene. I rolled down my window and called out, asking if anyone needed help or what was happening, but there was no response. It was like the area was deserted, devoid of any life or sound. As I drove past the construction signs, I noticed the other drivers hesitating, some turning back, others stopping, unsure of what to do. That's when things started to feel eerie. I saw figures standing in the shadows, these workers in reflective vests, just watching silently. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge us, just stood there. I felt this unease settling in, this inexplicable feeling that something wasn't right. It was like they were watching us, this silent scrutiny that sent shivers down my spine. I kept driving, feeling this growing sense of unease. I checked my rearview mirror, and I saw those workers. No, they weren't workers. They were something else, this realization sending a chill down my spine. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, this unnatural light that didn't seem human. It was like they were following me, this sense of being pursued by something otherworldly. I couldn't shake this feeling, this sense of danger lurking in the darkness. I saw other drivers speeding away, trying to get away from whatever was happening there. I picked up speed too, this urgency to escape that silent construction zone. But the figures were following, this eerie pursuit that made my heart race. I tried calling the authorities, but there was no signal. I felt isolated, this growing fear that I was at the mercy of something inexplicable. I saw some of the other drivers pulling over, trying to confront those figures, but it was futile. They didn't respond, just stood there, this eerie silence surrounding them. I drove faster, trying to put distance between me and that eerie construction crew. But they were relentless, this chase that seemed never-ending. I reached the nearest town, hoping to find help, but the figures were still following, this relentless pursuit that made my blood run cold. I found a gas station, a few people there, and I tried to explain what was happening, but they looked at me like I was crazy. It was like no one else had encountered those eerie figures on the highway. I stayed there for the night, too scared to continue driving. But even in the safety of the gas station, I felt this lingering fear, this memory of encountering something inexplicable on that deserted stretch of road. Me and my friend were on this road trip, cruising down this empty highway late at night when we saw them, a cluster of vendors selling stuff on the side of the road. It was odd, this late at night, so we decided to check it out. There were these makeshift stalls, dimly lit by lanterns, displaying peculiar items. The vendors looked strange too, their faces obscured by shadows, dressed in old-fashioned attire. We thought it'd be interesting, maybe find something unique to remember the trip by. As we approached, there was this eerie silence, no chatter, no background noise, just the faint hum of the distant highway. They were selling these bizarre items, odd trinkets, old books, and items I couldn't recognize. It was intriguing yet unsettling, this inexplicable feeling that something wasn't right. We asked about the items, but they just smiled, this cryptic grin that made my skin crawl. I felt this unease, this urge to leave, but my friend was curious, browsing the items. One of the vendors approached me, offering this old pendant. It looked ancient, with strange markings etched onto it. I declined, feeling this inexplicable dread. That's when things got weird. My friend bought something, this strange-looking doll. It was like a relic, with buttons for eyes and stitched lips. I tried to dissuade him, but he seemed drawn to it, this unsettling fascination. We left, continuing our journey, but things started to feel off. It was like a heavy fog settled over us, this strange energy surrounding that doll. We stopped at a motel for the night, but my friend insisted on keeping the doll close. I couldn't shake this feeling of impending doom, this sense of danger lurking around us. As the night progressed, strange things started happening. The room felt colder, shadows danced in the corners, and the doll, oh, that doll seemed to watch us, its button eyes following our every move. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but then my friend started acting strange. He became withdrawn, his eyes vacant, like he was under some sort of spell. I tried talking to him, but he wouldn't respond. He just sat there, cradling the doll, this eerie silence hanging between us. Then, things took a darker turn. Objects moved on their own, the lights flickered, and this oppressive feeling filled the room. I felt this panic rising inside me, this inexplicable fear. It was like we were trapped in a nightmare, this doll at the center of it all. I decided to get rid of it, to throw it away, but my friend wouldn't let me. He clutched it tighter, this possessiveness that was chilling. I couldn't sleep, this dread consuming me. I felt watched, this sinister presence in the room that made my skin crawl. I heard whispers, these faint murmurs that seemed to come from the doll. It was unnerving, this sense of being at the mercy of something malevolent. I tried to leave, to get away from that doll, but my friend blocked my way. His eyes were empty, this vacant stare that sent chills down my spine. I managed to break free, running out of the room, hoping to find help. But the motel was deserted, this eerie silence engulfing me. I called the authorities, explaining the situation, but they found nothing unusual when they arrived. My friend was gone, along with that doll, leaving me with this chilling memory of that encounter on the side of the highway. I was driving along this dark, empty highway, just me and the road stretching out ahead. It was late, and there weren't many cars around. Then, out of nowhere, this guy appeared on the side of the road, waving frantically. I slowed down, a bit wary at first, but I could see he was desperate. He rushed up to my car and started telling me about this imminent danger ahead, a massive accident, something that would cause chaos. I was skeptical, but there was this urgency in his voice, this fear in his eyes that made me pause. He urged me to take a different route, claiming it was the only way to avoid the impending disaster. I thanked him for the warning, but hesitated, unsure whether to believe a stranger in the dead of night. He seemed genuine, but the whole situation felt surreal. I decided to trust his warning, this nagging feeling urging me to take his advice. I followed the alternate route he suggested, this sense of apprehension growing with each passing mile. As I drove, I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched, this paranoia that settled in. It was as if someone or something was following me, lurking in the shadows. Then, I saw these flashing lights up ahead, police cars and ambulances surrounding this massive accident scene on the highway, the same route I'd been on earlier. It was surreal, this confirmation of what the stranger had warned me about. I felt this chilling realization that he was right, that I narrowly avoided being caught up in that chaos. But then, this fear crept in. How did he know? Why did he warn me? I couldn't shake this feeling of dread, this fear that someone had intentionally directed me away from that accident. It didn't make sense, but the whole situation felt wrong. I decided to pull over at a gas station, needing a moment to collect myself. But as I got out of the car, I saw him again, standing in the shadows, watching me. I approached cautiously, asking how he knew about the accident. But he didn't respond, just stood there, this unsettling silence hanging between us. I felt this growing fear, this realization that something wasn't right. I got back in my car, this overwhelming need to get away from that stranger and the inexplicable danger he warned me about. I drove, this sense of unease gnawing at me, this fear that lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me, this paranoia that consumed my thoughts. I reached a motel, hoping to find some solace, but that fear lingered. I tried to sleep, but every noise outside felt like his presence, this looming threat. I decided to leave, this instinct to get away overpowering me. But as I drove, I saw him again, standing by the side of the road, watching me drive away. It was this encounter with that stranger, that warning that seemed all too real, that left me shaken and haunted by the unknown danger and the inexplicable forewarning. I was biking along this stretch of highway, just enjoying the ride, feeling the wind against my face. It was getting late, and the highway seemed deserted, not a car in sight. Then, up ahead, I saw a group of people standing by the roadside. At first, I didn't pay much attention, just thinking they were fellow travelers or maybe locals. But as I got closer, I noticed something off about them, this intensity in their stares, this energy that felt hostile. I hesitated but kept pedaling, trying to avoid eye contact, hoping they were just taking a break. But then, they started shouting at me, these aggressive calls to stop. I felt this unease creeping in, this gut feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't stop, didn't want to engage with them, but I heard footsteps behind me, this sense of being pursued. I pedaled faster, this fear starting to take over, this primal instinct to get away. They were gaining on me, this group of strangers now chasing after me. I could hear their voices, their threats growing louder, this sense of danger closing in. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to get away from them. I pushed myself harder, my heart racing, my breaths becoming shallow. I glanced behind me, and they were still there, this menacing presence getting closer. I reached a bend in the road and took a different route, hoping to lose them. But they were relentless, still pursuing me, this fear gnawing at me as I pedaled as fast as I could. I came upon this deserted area, this isolated part of the highway, and I thought maybe I could hide, catch my breath. But as I stopped, trying to hide behind some bushes, they caught up. They surrounded me, this group of strangers, their faces contorted with anger. I didn't understand why they were after me, what I'd done to deserve this terror. They started yelling, demanding things I couldn't comprehend, this chaos swirling around me. I felt this raw fear, this sense of being at their mercy. I tried to reason with them, to explain that I didn't want trouble, that I just wanted to be left alone. But they didn't listen, didn't care. Their threats escalated, this aggression turning into something more sinister. I felt this panic rising inside me, this fight or flight instinct kicking in. I knew I couldn't reason with them, couldn't negotiate my way out of this nightmare. I bolted, pushing myself to pedal away from them, this terror driving me forward. I could hear their shouts behind me, their footsteps pounding the pavement as they chased me relentlessly. I didn't know how long I could keep going, my legs burning, my breaths coming in short gasps. But I had to keep moving, had to get away from these threatening strangers. I glimpsed a police car up ahead, and this surge of hope filled me. I screamed for help as I approached them, the officers quickly responding, trying to stop the pursuers. It was this terrifying encounter with those menacing individuals on the highway that left me trembling, haunted by the inexplicable hostility and the fear that had consumed me. I was driving along this highway, surrounded by the hum of the engine and the monotonous rhythm of the road. Up ahead, I noticed this sign, "Shortcut ahead," it said. I'd been on this road countless times and never noticed that sign before. The idea of a shortcut was tempting, and I figured, why not? I took the exit, venturing onto this narrow road that seemed less traveled. At first, it was all right, just a change of scenery, but then things started to feel off. The road got narrower, the trees closer, this sense of isolation creeping in. There were no other cars in sight, no signs of life around, just this unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. Then, I saw a figure up ahead, just standing by the roadside. As I got closer, I saw more than people, just standing there, staring blankly ahead. It was eerie, this sight of these motionless figures in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down, trying to make sense of it all, but they didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. It was as if they were frozen in time. I felt this unease settling in, this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe they were locals or lost travelers, but the atmosphere was getting more unsettling by the minute. I kept driving, hoping to get out of this strange area, but then I saw something else: abandoned vehicles, just parked by the roadside, some of them with open doors, as if the drivers had vanished. It sent this shiver down my spine, this feeling of dread intensifying. I wanted to turn back, find my way to the highway, but it felt like I was stuck in this maze of unfamiliar roads. As I continued, the road seemed to stretch endlessly, this suffocating sense of being trapped in a place that wasn't right. I wanted to call for help, but there was no signal on my phone, just this dead silence that echoed my growing fear. Then, I saw movement in the woods beside the road, these fleeting shadows darting among the trees. I didn't know what or who it was, but I felt this urgency to get out of there, to escape. I made a sharp turn, trying to find my way back to the highway, but it felt like I was going in circles. I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched, this paranoia that consumed my thoughts. My heart raced as I drove faster, this sheer desperation to escape guiding my every move. But then, my worst fear came true. The road ahead was blocked by fallen trees, this barrier that halted my escape. I tried to reverse, but there were figures emerging from the woods, this creeping dread settling in as I realized I was surrounded. I didn't know who they were, what they wanted, but their presence felt menacing. I felt this primal fear taking over, this fight or flight instinct kicking in. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to find a way out, but there was nowhere to go. I heard noises outside, this feeling of being trapped in this nightmare, this overwhelming terror as they closed in around my car. It was this encounter with the unnerving situations off the highway that left me shaking, haunted by the inexplicable danger and the nightmare I couldn't escape. I was on my usual routine, going for a run late at night. It was coming, running along the quiet highway under the pale glow of the moon. But that night, things took a turn. As I jogged, I noticed this strange flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I glanced over, thinking it might be an animal or just my imagination playing tricks on me. But there was nothing there, just the dark outline of trees against the night sky. I kept going, but this feeling of being watched lingered. It was unsettling, this sensation that something wasn't right. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my mind playing games in the darkness. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. I slowed down, thinking someone might be catching up for a run or a late-night walk. But when I turned to look, there was no one there, just the empty stretch of road. My pace quickened, this sense of unease settling in, but I tried to focus on my breathing, on the rhythm of my steps. Yet, those footsteps persisted, this eerie sound echoing in the night. I picked up my pace, wanting to distance myself from whatever was causing that unnerving sensation. But then, I heard whispers, these faint voices that seemed to come from nowhere, their words indistinguishable but filled with this ominous undertone. I glanced around, feeling this growing sense of dread. There was no one in sight, just me on that deserted road. I wondered if it was my mind playing tricks on me, conjuring up these eerie sounds in the silence of the night. As I ran, I noticed this figure in the distance, just a silhouette against the dimly lit road. I couldn't make out any details, but something about it sent shivers down my spine. I picked up my pace, trying to put distance between me and that figure. But no matter how fast I ran, It seemed to stay the same distance away, this haunting presence that refused to fade. I felt this wave of panic rising within me, this urge to flee, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of being pursued. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the fear gnawed at me. Then, I saw more figures, these fleeting shadows that appeared and disappeared along the roadside. They seemed to be watching me, following my every move, this overwhelming feeling of being surrounded. I pushed myself harder, my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of my own breaths drowning out everything else. I wanted to scream for help, but my voice failed me in that moment of terror. I reached a bend in the road, thinking I might lose them, but they were still there, those figures, this sense of being trapped in this chilling encounter that I couldn't escape. I turned into a different route, hoping to find safety, but they were relentless, still there, still haunting my run. I couldn't understand what they wanted, why they were there, this inexplicable fear consuming me. I glanced at my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal, just this isolation that added to my panic. I felt this overwhelming sense of being at their mercy, this chilling realization that I was alone and vulnerable. I ran until I couldn't anymore, my body exhausted, my mind consumed by fear. And when I finally stopped, there was this deafening silence, this absence of the haunting whispers and figures. It was this inexplicable and chilling encounter during my nighttime jog that left me terrified, haunted by the inexplicable and the eerie feeling of being watched, pursued by something I couldn't understand. The night was thick with darkness as I drove along this desolate highway, barely a car in sight. It was eerie, this feeling of isolation on the road. Then, up ahead, I saw this old toll booth, seemingly out of place in the middle of nowhere. I hesitated, but figured it might be a chance to stretch my legs. As I approached, I noticed the toll booth looked abandoned, but there was a light on inside. I pulled up, expecting some grumpy attendant, but there was this silence, this sense that something wasn't right. I rolled down my window, calling out, "Hello?" No response. It was just me and the quiet hum of my engine. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe they were in the restroom or something. I reached for my wallet to pay the toll when I heard this creaking sound, like footsteps on the pavement. I looked up, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. My heart started racing, this growing sense of unease taking hold. Then, this figure emerged from the toll booth, this tall, gaunt person, their face obscured by the dim light inside. They moved in this slow, deliberate manner, this unnerving grace to their steps. I tried to make out their features, but it was like they were shrouded in darkness. I felt this chill crawl down my spine, this instinctual fear that gripped me. I held out my payment, trying to act casual, but there was no response, no movement from them. They just stood there, this unsettling silence hanging in the air. I felt this overwhelming urge to leave, this gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. But before I could even start to pull away, they spoke, this voice that sounded hollow and distant. "Your payment isn't needed here," they said in this eerie tone that made my skin crawl. I didn't know how to react, just this surge of fear that made my hands tremble. I tried to speak, but words failed me. They continued, "But your toll has been paid in advance. Drive on." I didn't understand, didn't know what they meant, but this sense of urgency to leave overwhelmed me. I hit the gas, this feeling of relief washing over me as I drove away from that ominous toll booth. But as I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw them still standing there, this haunting figure in the middle of the empty highway. It sent shivers down my spine, this inexplicable fear lingering. I kept driving, trying to shake off that unsettling encounter, but their words echoed in my mind. Who had paid my toll? And why did that toll booth feel like a passage into something far more sinister? It was this inexplicable encounter with the foreboding toll booth attendant on that desolate highway that haunted me, leaving me with this lingering fear of the unknown and an unsettling feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly chilling. I was driving home from work, like any other day. The highway was relatively empty, just the usual traffic passing by. But then, I noticed this car behind me, tailgating too closely. At first, I didn't pay much attention, thinking they were in a hurry or something. But as the miles passed, the car stayed right on my tail, this persistent presence that made me uneasy. I switched lanes, trying to let them pass, but they followed suit, this unsettling determination to stay behind me. I couldn't make out the driver's face, just this shadowy figure behind the wheel. It was unnerving, this feeling of being watched, pursued by someone I couldn't see. I tried to focus on the road, ignoring the increasing tension. But then, that car started getting closer, this sense of danger looming closer with each passing second. I felt this surge of panic rising within me. My heart raced, and I started to sweat, this fear gripping me as I tried to shake off that relentless pursuer. I took a different exit, hoping to lose them, but they followed, this haunting presence right behind me. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I just kept driving, this sense of dread growing with each passing mile. I wanted to call for help, but my phone was out of reach. That driver didn't let up, this relentless pursuit that seemed to have no end. I felt this overwhelming sense of being hunted, this chilling realization that I was in danger. I looked for a place to pull over, to confront them or seek help, but there was nothing around. It was just me and that ominous car on that empty stretch of road. I tried to speed up, hoping to lose them, but they matched my pace, this persistent shadow that refused to fade away. My mind raced with thoughts, with scenarios of what they could want or why they were after me. I could feel my hands shaking on the wheel, my breath shallow and rapid. I didn't know if it was just some road rage or something more sinister, but the fear was suffocating. I tried to switch lanes, to lose them in the traffic, but they mirrored my every move, this chilling determination that sent shivers down my spine. My thoughts were racing, my heart pounding in my chest, this sense of helplessness overwhelming me. I wanted to scream for help, but there was no one around. I just kept driving, this nightmare on wheels behind me. I felt this overwhelming terror, this chilling realization that I was at their mercy, that this pursuit might not end well. I tried to remember every turn, every landmark, hoping to find a way out, but they were always right there, this haunting presence that refused to let go. It was this inexplicable and terrifying encounter, this relentless pursuit on that highway that left me haunted with this chilling fear that I might not make it out alive. I was driving late at night with a couple of friends, and we needed to refuel, so we spotted this gas station off the highway. It looked all right from a distance, but as we pulled in closer, things started to feel off. The station was eerily quiet, no signs of life around. I thought maybe it was just late, that they closed up early, but something about it didn't sit right. We needed gas, so we decided to check it out. Pulling up to the pumps, we realized there were no cars, no attendants, just an eerie silence. I tried to shrug it off, maybe it was just a slow night for them. But as I got out of the car, this shiver ran down my spine. It was too quiet, too still. The place looked old, worn down. Lights flickered above us, casting these unsettling shadows around. We walked towards the building, thinking someone might be inside, but the door creaked open as if it hadn't been touched in years. The inside was even more unsettling, dusty shelves, old magazines scattered, a layer of neglect everywhere. I called out, but there was no response. It was this eerie silence that sent a chill down my spine. We decided to grab what we needed and leave. But as we were about to head out, strange things started happening. The lights flickered more erratically, and we heard these odd creaks, like someone moving in the shadows. I felt this knot in my stomach, this sense of danger that I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just our nerves, playing tricks on us in this abandoned place. But then, things got weirder. Items on the shelf started moving on their own, falling off with no one near them. It was like the place had a life of its own, and it wasn't a friendly one. I felt this sense of impending doom, this urgency to get out, but we needed gas. As we made our way back to the pumps, the lights flickered faster, and this feeling of being watched settled over us. We hurried, trying to fuel up, but the pump didn't seem to be working, no gas flowing. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from inside the station. We froze, exchanging terrified looks. We were alone, or so we thought. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. The footsteps continued, getting closer. Panic started to set in. We needed to leave, now. We ran to the car, this sense of urgency driving us. I fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. My heart raced as I kept trying, the sound of those footsteps getting louder. Finally, the car roared to life, and we peeled out of there, leaving that eerie gas station behind us. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and I saw figures standing in the shadows of the station, watching us leave. It was this inexplicable encounter at that supposedly functional gas station that left us shaken, with this lingering fear that something sinister lurked within those abandoned walls. I was on this road trip with a couple of friends, driving on this desolate highway that seemed to stretch on forever. The night was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. But then, something strange happened. We were flipping through stations, trying to find some good music when we stumbled upon this weird frequency. It wasn't on the usual channels, just this odd static that drew us in, like it was calling out to us. At first, it was just this faint crackling, like interference, but then it started to clear up. We heard this voice, distorted and eerie, talking about things that made no sense, things that felt too personal, too close to home. The voice spoke about events that hadn't happened yet, like it was predicting the future, describing moments from our trip before they unfolded. It was unnerving, this feeling like someone was watching us, knowing our every move. We couldn't turn it off, this strange broadcast that seemed to have a grip on us. The voice was unsettling, speaking in this hollow tone that sent shivers down our spines. As we continued driving, the voice became more chilling, more foreboding. It started talking about us, about things it shouldn't have known. I felt this knot in my stomach, this overwhelming sense of dread. We tried changing the station, turning the dial, but it stayed on that frequency, this relentless broadcast that seemed to follow us wherever we went. It was like we were trapped in this surreal nightmare. The voice spoke about dark things, things that made us question our reality. It talked about events that felt too familiar, too real, as if it was narrating our lives in this twisted way. We couldn't make sense of it, couldn't understand how this radio station was tuned into our lives, our thoughts. It was like someone was playing a sick game, toying with us from some unknown realm. As the night wore on, the broadcasts became more sinister, this sense of impending doom looming over us. It spoke about things that hadn't happened yet, things it shouldn't have known, details so personal that it felt like a violation of our privacy. We were scared, shaken to the core, trying to rationalize what was happening. But there was no explanation, just this feeling of being trapped in this nightmare, this surreal experience that made us question our sanity. The voice on the radio became more urgent, more demanding. It was like it wanted something from us, like it was leading us to some inevitable, terrifying conclusion. We felt this urge to stop listening, to turn it off, but it had this hold on us that we couldn't break. We contemplated turning off the radio altogether, but it was like it was fused to our car, this strange broadcast that wouldn't let go. It was this suffocating feeling, this sense of being at the mercy of something beyond our understanding. Eventually, the broadcast stopped, leaving us in this unsettling silence that felt almost deafening. We were left shaken, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but there were no answers. We drove in silence for the rest of the night, this eerie encounter with that mysterious radio station haunting us, leaving us with this chilling fear that we were not alone, that something beyond our comprehension had reached out to us on that desolate highway. I remember it was a regular evening, just driving home from work, nothing out of the ordinary. I was cruising down the highway, radio playing some music, nothing strange, just the usual stretch of road. But then, everything just went blank. One moment, I was behind the wheel, the next, total darkness. I woke up with a jolt, disoriented, confused. It wasn't the familiar side of the highway. I was in my driveway, in my car, parked at home. I couldn't understand how I got there. It was this instant panic, this overwhelming fear clawing at me, wondering what happened during that blackout. I tried to piece it together, but there was this void, this gap in my memory, like someone had erased that part of the drive home. It was terrifying, not knowing what transpired, how I ended up here without any recollection. My heart was racing, adrenaline pumping, this unshakable sense of dread creeping in. I checked my phone. The clock showed a significant gap in time, hours lost. How did I cover that distance? What happened during that blackout? I stepped out of the car, every step heavy with this surreal fear. It was as if time had skipped, leaving me stranded in this eerie confusion. I couldn't shake off this feeling of being watched, this lingering unease that something had gone terribly wrong. I rushed inside, hoping for some explanation, maybe a note, a message, anything to fill in the blanks. But there was nothing. It was like waking up in a nightmare, this inexplicable sense of disconnection from reality. My mind raced with all these wild possibilities. Did I have an accident? Was I drugged? It was this whirlwind of fear and confusion, not knowing what happened during that missing time. I tried retracing my steps, but there were no answers, just this gap in my memory, this void that left me trembling with uncertainty. It was like I had been plucked out of that moment, dropped into this inexplicable void. The more I tried to remember, the more terrified I became. It was this suffocating feeling, this sense of losing control, not understanding how I got home, how I blacked out on that highway. I called my friends, my family, hoping they might shed some light on what happened, but no one knew anything. It was this deep-seated fear gnawing at me, this dread of the unknown, the unexplained. I couldn't sleep that night, haunted by that blackout, that inexplicable gap in time. Every sound outside made me jump, every shadow seemed menacing. It was this overwhelming fear that lingered, this feeling of vulnerability, of being at the mercy of some unknown force. Days passed, and the memory of that blackout stayed with me, this haunting presence that cast a shadow over everything. I tried to go about my routine, but that fear was always there, this paranoia that something sinister had happened, something beyond my understanding. I sought answers, went to doctors, got tests done, but everything came back normal. There was no explanation, just this gaping hole in my memory that refused to be filled. That experience changed something in me, this constant feeling of being on edge, of not knowing what happened during that blackout. It was like a piece of me was missing, this unsettling uncertainty that lingered in the back of my mind. To this day, I still don't know what happened, how I got home, what caused that blackout. It's this chilling realization that some things are beyond our comprehension, that some mysteries may never be solved. I'd been on that highway countless times, but this time felt different. There was this car, an old beat-up thing, that seemed to be following me. At first, I shrugged it off, just another driver going the same way. But the longer it stuck around, the more my unease grew. It was one of those old clunkers, rusty and battered, headlights flickering like it had seen better days. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, there it was, tailing me. I tried to shake it off, changed lanes, sped up, slowed down, but it stuck like glue. My heart started pounding, this irrational fear creeping up. I mean, what was so scary about another car on the road? But something about it, the way it hung back, kept the same pace as me. It was just off. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just coincidence, but the longer it trailed me, the more this unsettling feeling settled in. It felt deliberate, like it wasn't just some random driver. There was this intentionality in its persistence that set my nerves on edge. I took a few exits, tried to lose it, but it stayed right behind me. It was like this silent pursuit, this slow build of anxiety. My mind raced with questions. Why was it following me? Who was behind the wheel? It was this irrational fear that gnawed at me, this creeping sense of being watched. I finally decided to confront it, pulled over on the side of the road, expecting it to pass. But it didn't. It just stopped behind me, engine idling, headlights glaring into my rearview mirror. I couldn't make out the driver, just this shadowy figure behind the windshield. I waited, expecting it to drive off, but it didn't. Minutes passed, and that car just sat there, this eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. It felt like it was waiting for something, like it had a purpose, and that purpose was me. I couldn't take it anymore. This silent standoff was freaking me out. I pulled back onto the highway, hoping to lose it in the traffic, but it stayed with me, this persistent shadow on the road. I reached for my phone, thinking maybe I should call the cops, but in that moment, it was like my brain just froze. I couldn't dial, couldn't think straight, this overwhelming fear taking over. I took a few more turns, hoping to shake it off, but it was relentless. No matter what I did, it stayed behind me, this haunting presence that refused to let go. I was sweating, heart racing, this panic building up inside me. I couldn't rationalize it, couldn't understand why this old car was causing such terror. It was this primal fear, this gut feeling that something wasn't right. I drove faster, hoping to put some distance between us, but it kept up, never faltering. It was like it had made up its mind to follow me, and there was no escaping it. The longer it stayed with me, the more my thoughts spiraled into this dark place. Who was driving that car? What did they want? My imagination ran wild with all these terrifying scenarios, this endless loop of fear and dread. I was in a frenzy, this sheer panic gripping me, adrenaline pumping as I tried to outmaneuver it. But it was futile. That old car was like a shadow, sticking to me, this looming threat that wouldn't go away. My mind was a mess, this desperate need to get away, this fear that it might catch up, do something unimaginable. It was like this nightmare playing out in real time, this persistent dread that I couldn't shake off. I don't know how long it lasted, this agonizing drive with that car at my heels. It felt like an eternity, this relentless pursuit that left me shaken to my core. Finally, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, it peeled off onto a different road. I watched it disappear in my rearview mirror, this overwhelming sense of relief washing over me. But even as it vanished from sight, that fear lingered, this haunting uncertainty of what could have happened if it hadn't let go. It was this lingering dread that stayed with me long after the old car disappeared into the night, leaving me rattled, paranoid, and forever changed by that harrowing encounter.